morning. Good morning. My name is Peter Kulczyk. I work with the International Code Council. I'd like to welcome you to Residential Building Codes for Green Homes. How many folks in here live in a part of the country or the state that has building codes in effect? Okay, if you were to build a home in your city right now, would you need to get a building permit possibly? Okay. Okay. And I'm going to talk a little about code adoption in a few minutes here. But if you were to build a new house in your area, you wanted to put a green roof on it, do you think the building codes might actually have provisions for that? No, it's kind of new technology. Well, actually, it's not new technology, but it's not far enough along where it's actually in the building code. And there are a handful of things. New technology is coming all the time. If I wanted to put solar panels on my own house roof, which I did by the way, which is kind of cool, there's issues related to solar panels, but does the building code address it? No. So how can we get those things approved if we want to build a new home with some of these things in it? What if I wanted to build a straw bale house and have Mark Morgan or somebody next door do it for me? Are there provisions in there for straw bale? Absolutely not, but we can work our way through some of those and show you things to think about that will help the building official, building inspector, give you approvals on those items. Innovative technology. By the way, if you have questions, feel free to ask as I'm going through. Did you have a question?
Well, I had a technique approved, and then after I started investing time and money into the house, afterwards, I get to the first inspection, then it was disapproved. Okay?
Okay.
So it was approved on the quite elaborate plan that was state approved, but then the building inspector, as I already had money and time invested into it, then told me I couldn't do it.
Wow, was there something different about what you're building compared to the plan a little bit, or?
But the plan, I know how to draw plans, and
okay.
I built to the plan.
Okay. Were you able to work through that?
I did eventually, but it stalled construction by 2.5 months.
Oh, and that's kind of frustrating.
I had to pay the 200 bribe fee, variance fee, and basically write a research paper about what I was doing.
All right.
So I did eventually work through it.
Okay. Was there some engineering needed on that? I'm just curious.
No.
Okay. We're going to talk about those kind of things, but that's a good point. Absolutely. By the way, this program normally is a 3-hour program. We're going to do it in 50 minutes. So if it seems like I had too much coffee, it's just because I'm trying to, move on. But I want to hear your questions, and we can go through those too. A few things about myself. Okay, enough. What I want to do is talk about these innovative products and innovative technology, and see how we can work those into the building code, or get approvals for those. And there's a lot of different green building programs out there, the LEED and the National Green Building Standard and Minnesota Green Star, and there's this whole long list. And to tell you the truth, the provisions related to construction, they're really very, very similar. Just minute differences. One program will say, if you put up a house and you want to have a solar orientation, 15 degrees of dead south, you get some points. Another one will say 20. But they're really close, they're really similar. We're going to talk about a few things. Alternate materials, things, when I say alternate, meaning they're not actually in the building code right now. May never be in the building code. Vegetated roofs, vegetative or vegetated, same thing. Log construction, which is going to get a lot easier. Solar panels, straw bale, rammed earth, a handful of others, and we'll see how fast we can go. Okay, I want to also talk about what green construction is, and why it might not necessarily meet the building code. So what's green construction? We want to build energy efficient buildings. We want to have as little impact on the environment as possible. Basically build a structure, save our environment, use materials that are more local, use more materials that are more durable. Okay. We're kind of doing that right now with homes we build. If you think about it, we try to do durable exteriors, we try to insulate them very well. We try to use proper glazing. A lot of us are putting on solar, and we're trying to save water. There's a lot of things we're kind of doing right now. Okay, and like I said, there's a handful of green building programs out there. Okay, what we're going to kind of make reference to is the International Residential Code. The residential code it's adopted in not every state in the United States, and in some states it's not adopted across the state. Like I live in Minnesota, it's adopted in Minnesota, but it's exempted in jurisdictions less than 2,500 people. Now in Wisconsin, for example, they have their homegrown building code. I believe, this is my opinion, that they'll probably be adopting the international codes in the near future. But their provisions, when you look at them, they're really similar to what's in the IRC and the old International Building Code and Uniform Building Codes. Things just don't change that much. So if you're building locally, a lot of the same requirements. So when people talk about building to code, is that actually building green? Building to code means that it's structurally sound, it's energy efficient, it's safe for the occupants, it's weather resistant. The things that the code is always covered. Now, does the building code cover sustainability, green construction? Some issues in it, or some items in it might be green, but it doesn't actually have like chapters referencing green or sustainability. Now, if I'm going to build green, does that mean that I'm building to code? Not necessarily. In fact, some of the green building programs make no reference to building codes. You can find, you can look at it, like one, I'm not going to mention any particular green building programs, but you can look at one, it'll say build a weather resistive exterior. Okay, what does that mean? In the building code, it's pretty specific, and I'll show you some things on that. But some of the green building programs, a little bit less to codes, more emphasis on durability, energy, life cycle, and we'll talk about the differences. So just because it's building to green, or building green, doesn't mean it's building to code. And I just mentioned this, a lot of green programs don't have specific references to code. Okay, a lot of green building programs do base a lot of the information on particular building codes that we have in effect. That's probably good, because it's going to make the person that is building to that green building program, it's going to make it easier for them to comply with the building code. Okay, how can you use the green building program? You could use it as a municipality could adopt one, or you as a homeowner, let's say you choose, you just want to build a better home with less impact on the environment. You could hire someone to design a LEED home for you, for example. That could be your choice. That's why I think a lot of us are here today, because we want to build better homes, we want to build them with less impact on the environment, more energy efficient. A municipality could adopt it. I don't see this happening right now very often. What I have seen is in some states, they've adopted green building programs like for a new jurisdiction only. Not a new jurisdiction, a new development. Well, they'll have a development with 30 houses, and they'll say every one of these has to be a LEED Gold or a LEED whatever, and they'll kind of make that the emphasis of the development. I want to mention a couple of words, prescriptive and performance. Building codes are pretty much based on prescriptive criteria. Prescriptive means if you were going to build a foundation, let's say a full basement in your home, and you wanted to use the building code's pretty much going to say if you have a certain depth of basement, maybe an 8-foot basement, and you're going to use a certain thickness of wall, like 12-inch block, and you have a certain type of soil up against it, sand or gravel or heavy clay, it's going to pretty much tell you what kind of steel you need in it. It's a prescriptive code, which makes it pretty easy if you're going to build within those parameters. But what if you decide that on your basement, instead of building concrete masonry or a poured concrete wall, that you want to build with rammed earth or adobe or something else, then it's kind of like, whoop, right out of the building code. So how can we do that? Okay, so prescriptive is clear-cut limitations. I'll give you another example. If I wanted to put a house wrap on a house, and whether it's felt paper or some house sheathing paper, the building code is real specific about what kind of what standard that paper should meet. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, where if you have innovative cladding materials and stuff, under prescriptive, they don't fit in so well. Okay, so how can we get those approved? So that's that's prescriptive. Performance-based codes is, let's say you come to somebody and say, I want to build under your code, but I want to build a geodesic dome with a glass roof, and I want to build the foundation wall, or the walls above grade out of straw bale and everything below grade out of rammed earth. They're going to look at you and go, what should we do with this? So that would be a performance-based. Performance meaning that you need to provide some information, criteria, some maybe engineering data to the building official to show that what you're proposing meets an equivalency of what's in the code. That's performance building. In fact, same thing with energy code. There's like, energy code is prescriptive, meaning, let's say you frame wall up 2x6 studs in this area, it's going to say, it'll say 5.5 inches of fiberglass meeting an R value of 20, okay? But a performance code would say, if you came to me with some new innovative insulation technology and I need to meet an R20, I would need to, as a building official, would need to see something from you that gave me data that showed that you can meet that R20. Maybe you came to me and said, you know what, I'm gonna grind up sod and I'm going to put it in this wall cavity, or maybe I'm going to make the whole wall out of sod. I would just say, do you have something that can verify that that's going to be an R value of 20? Log home, same way. You want to build a log home? Can a log home meet the energy code? Absolutely. Can you determine the R value on a log based on like R value per inch? Absolutely, you can do that. We'll talk a little bit about that. So prescriptive versus performance. Okay, I want to just talk a little bit about the administrative authority. That means like working with the building official, which sometimes may be challenging. And kind of keep in mind that the building official or building inspector, when I use the term building official, that usually means the person in charge, the administrative authority. A building inspector usually means personnel working for that person that actually does field inspections. Building inspectors, plumbing inspectors, mechanical inspectors. But the building official is the administrative authority. And keep in mind that they also have a job to do. Their job is to make sure that a house built in their jurisdiction meets the building code. And in my own experience, most of them are pretty easy to get along with. It's just that that's not 100%. And the other thing about building inspectors is that not all building inspectors are up to date on all new technology. If you came to some building inspector and said, I want to build a house with straw bale construction, and they've never seen straw bale before in their life, what will be their first response? They might just say, you can't build out here. And until you're able to, if you're the first one, you're going to have a little bit more of a challenge than if you build 3 or 4 or 5 of these straw bales, because the second one's going to be easier. And as a building inspector, I'm going to say, give me some data that shows that this straw bale will work. We'll talk a little bit about straw bale. Yes, sir?
What if you started with an outbuilding inspector or something?
Okay, the question up front was, what if you started with an outbuilding? You buy a plot of land, the first building you want to put on is some outbuilding, meaning some accessory structure. Maybe it's a pole building, maybe it's a storage building, but you're going to make it out of something a little bit different than they're used to. Might be easier to, you use the word test the instructor, I like that, test the instructor. It might be, if you use the same technology when you're building the home, it might be easier if you start with a easier project. Absolutely, sure. So you got the building official, they hire building inspectors. They're also going to do a plan review. Keep in mind that one of the best things you can do when building a home is to give the building official the best set of plans you can and the best set of specifications you can. Because I'll tell you, as in a past lifetime when I was a building inspector, people would walk in and say, I want to build a new house, and here's my plans, and I swear it looked like they did it during their lunch hour on paper napkins, and you go, I don't even know what you're building here. Is this a house or whatever, And then the problem that creates is if you have very little detail on it and you actually get a building permit, or maybe you don't even get through the process, is that when you go to build it and you pull out those paper napkins and you say, well, here's what I want, and now you're building something that's really not on the plan, not enough detail, it's going to just slow that process down. And you don't want to be slowing your process down because you want to get this house built. You want to get it enclosed and weather tight and all that. So the more detail, the better. And sometimes it sounds like a lot of work. You go, well, I just want to put this siding on. Yeah, what kind of siding? What brand? What, you know, what model of siding? Can you give some siding specs to them? Or I have some new innovative metal roof system. Contact the manufacturer of the metal roof and say, give me all the specs you have. I'm going to make it part of the submittal documents. So what if your submittal documents end up being about 100 pages? The more you can give up front, the better it's going to, the easier it's going to make it. Okay, alternate materials. I'm kind of talking about that. You have something that's a little different, whether it's your straw bale, rammed earth, adobe. Maybe you're building an Earthship. Anybody ever build an Earthship? An Earthship is. I saw my first Earthship in Albuquerque a few months back, where you basically build a house out of whatever you have. And I'm not kidding. This gentleman built a house out of, the foundation was out of 3,500 car tires. Laid flat, overlapped, packed with clay, some steel rods pounded in, 3 sides, south side facing toward the sun, and a metal roof system, and inside was all just clay and adobe, and it was a beautiful home. And I actually had a chance to go through with a couple of the local state inspectors who were just kind of showing me around a little bit. And I said, so how do you approve something like that? And he goes, you know, we've seen a few of them, and the idea of car tires seems a little absurd to a lot of people. But if you've seen a few and you see how they build it and you realize that it works, it's time tested, and it's good use of car tires versus whatever else we do with them, why not? And got a little tour in this house. It was great. It was an Earthship. And the interesting thing was I asked the I asked the guys, I said, how long? I asked the guy that was building it. He was so low key, so down to earth. I said, I'm just kind of curious about how long you've been working on this. He says, well, about 15 years. So I asked the building inspectors, I said, how long are your permits normally good for? And he said, 6 months. And I said, so what do you do on this one? He said, you know, we just throw a note in the file every 6 months and say, Joe Blow is still working on it, da-da-da. And he says, we haven't even charged for an extension of the permit. This guy was just working on it. And as we drove through this, it was up in the hills in Albuquerque, and there were other piles of car tires around, so we drive by and I'd say, new house, and he goes, you got it. That's alternative materials. You know, the more information the building officials can get and the more experience they have with them, it's going to be easier. You know, it's probably like the first time they ever saw an engineered truss or a wood eye joist, open web truss, engineered studs, finger jointed studs. You go, finger jointed studs, what the heck are these? That's what they take not so good wood and they cut out all the knots, and then they make finger joints, glue them together, and test them, and then they're grade stamped just like a regular stud. Better use of previously waste material. So it's kind of convincing them. It's kind of like buying a new car a model of car that you've never had before. You've kind of got to get worked into it and have some background, have somebody give you some information on it. Okay. So if you need to supply whatever data that the building official needs. The more you supply, the better. Okay, and also anybody ever build a lead home in here? Leadership, Energy, and Environmental Design. Okay, the lead homes actually will have another person involved called a Green Rater that will be like a third-party inspector. And they'd probably want to be involved with the process, the plan review also. Actually, they will be involved. Okay. I want to show you an example of a quick use of alternative materials. If you're going to build just a wood frame house, you frame it up, you got your sheathing on, what's the next thing you put on it? Anybody?
Building paper.
Somebody said Tyvek, you're going to put on building paper. What if you were going to build it 40 years ago, what might have you put on it? Tar paper, felt paper, absolutely. So how did we transition to a lot of house wraps? If you think about those are engineered products. Well, if I'm a building official and you come to me with Typar or Tyvek, I could pretty much say, yeah, you can install it. I've seen it installed a million times and I've already read the specs on it. And with some products, you might come to me and I'll say, I've never heard of it before. Once again, you're going to need some data. So I'm going to give you an example. And I'm just going to use house sheeting paper as an example. And this can apply to a lot of different assemblies on a house, whether it's foundations or roofing. Okay. So let's say I decide that I want to build a framed house, framed out of something. Okay, the building code is going to tell me I need to have some type of felt paper on it. It's going to tell me number 15, which is actually called type 1 felt. Number 15 used to be called 15 pound, meaning 15 pounds per 100 square feet. They've renamed it about 20 years ago to number 15 because it actually averages about 7 to 9 pounds per 100 square feet. So they use the same number, but it's not as heavy as it used to be. So that's the standard. It's a standard in the industry for a long time. And this standard comes in different grades depending on what you're doing. If you're using regular siding, you can put any of the 4 grades on. If you're using stucco or adhered veneer, plastered rock, some kind of stone on it, you actually need to have a breathable or permeable paper on it, which is a grade D paper. How many people put on like stuccos or have put on stuccos and stuff? Have you run into this with the permeable paper thing?
I don't use any, I want the wall to breathe, so I don't use any paper of any sort.
Okay, okay. You know, the issue about breathable walls is, you know, in the building code right now, it seems like over the last, well, since we had the big energy crisis, how many people remember the oil embargo of '73? I think most of us were at least alive in '73, okay? And what happened? The price of oil shot up. What else happened? In many states, they started adopting energy codes in '73. What else happened in '73? All of a sudden, we go from 2x4 wood frame with 3.5 inches of fiberglass to sheathed foams and all kinds of other things. And since that time, we've gotten houses that were more energy efficient, more sealed up, more sealed penetrations. But if not properly constructed, we've also run into issues with moisture trapped in walls. And so it's not only building tight, but building right. So there's certain ways that you need to build that. And one of the issues certainly is vapor transmission through walls, and the issues with what kind of vapor retarders should we have, or vapor barriers. Actually, on the walls, technically it's vapor retarders. The poly we normally put on the inside, but you also want to have one that has some ability to let moisture through it in air conditioning seasons. So it's kind of a trick. It's like, how do you have a vapor retarder on the warm side in the winter and have it more breathable in the summer or in warm, humid climates? It's challenging. Yes, sir?
If it isn't the simplest way to do that, just using the latex paint on the inside drywall?
Absolutely. You can use a latex paint as a vapor retarder. In fact, the latest edition of the International Residential Code says vapor retarder perm rating not exceeding 1.0, but it also has, it now allows you to use, it now specifically says you can use the faced fiberglass like we used to. You don't have to have poly running all the way across, but you can also specifically use paint. It'll say latex paint 3 mils thick. So who can measure 3 mils, by the way? All right. Do you know what's 3 mils is the thickness of a dollar bill. So, and as you're building these houses, you see a lot of those just go, right? So yeah, you can use latex paint. In fact, if I was going to build a new house today, I'd put it's just my opinion, not working for anybody in particular, but I'd put as little vapor retarder on the inside as I could. Don't quote me on that. Yes, sir?
Another option is to use a insulative wall material that absorbs moisture purposely. That's hygroscopic, so that it then absorbs moisture in the high humidity season like we're getting into now, and then in the winter it releases it into the house as the house dries.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it kind of dries itself off that way. Sure. You've been doing your research, haven't you? That's good. I like this. All right. So normally I'd put a felt paper on the wall, and the building code's going to be specific, telling me how to put it on. Other products, we see foams, and we see somebody mentioned Tyvek, and we see this is a Dow product down here stuff. Other materials. If you come to the building official and you want to use a rigid foam on the outside, then bring the specs for the rigid foam to the building official, because they're going to need to know some things about the rigid foam itself and some of the properties of it, permeability and how it's supposed to be installed. The more information you can provide, the better. So let's do this weather resistant thing. Here's some Tyvek. Okay, I want to put some Tyvek on the wall. you need to bring some data to the building official, third-party testing, maybe manufacturer specifications. I'm also going to show you one other one that if you're building homes at all, there's the ICC that I work for, they have this evaluation service, which by the way is free. And they got this website, ICC-ES-evaluationservice.org. They have about 22,000 evaluation reports on there. And what they do is manufacturers like Tyvek and Typar, the manufacturers of those products will go to the ICC with their test data. The ICC evaluates it, and they basically write this evaluation saying, this, I'll use Tyvek, they'll say this house sheathing paper is equivalent to grade D, felt paper, type 1, whatever, when installed according to the manufacturer, and they'll give some specs on it. So that way, if I go to the building official, oh, and I can go to this website, I can put it right, just type in Tyvek or Typar or whatever kind of foam you have and see if they have a report there. I'll just tell you that most manufacturers have them. House sheathing papers, anchoring systems, different types of anchor straps and all that. You'll see a lot of products on here, the manufacturers go to them. And you can get these reports, you print them out, they're free. It might be 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages long. And then when you go to the building official and say, hey, I got this new anchoring system on my wall. I don't want to use 1/2-inch bolts at 6 foot on center. I want to use this really unusual little strap that has this kind of a nailing system. And they're going to go, I haven't seen that before. And you can go, here's the ICC ES report if that'll help you. And, you know, if that'll help you, you know. And they have conditions of use. Tell you the truth, this is one of the cheapest, easiest things that'll help make your life easier if you're building for yourself or building homes in general, these reports. And just look them up and it's a good thing. Yes, sir?
Do they test like local materials, like say if you're doing a clay straw wall, do they have any of those kind of builder?
Good,
I don't know how you describe
good question. If you didn't hear his question is, does the ES reports, do they have test reports, evaluation reports on things that may be unique to the area, like based on the soils in the area? Not related to soils, what they have is manufactured products. The interesting thing about soils is it could vary across your neighborhood, and it would be a little challenging to try to write that, but I will bring up one thing. When I was in Albuquerque, I noticed a lot of people were building with rammed earth. And I had heard about rammed earth, but I never saw it. What they basically do is take some formwork, about 18 inches wide, they climb into it, and they throw this kind of heavy clay into it with a little mixture of Portland cement. They mix it up, they throw it in there, and they got a machine tamper. It's not very big, and they stand inside, and they just tamp it back and forth and up and down. And they built this wall out of the dirt that was 100 yards away from the site, okay? Local, that's about as local as it gets. And how do they approve something like that? The state of New Mexico made it, what they did was they got some engineering people together and they looked at the soils in the state and they said if it's this type of soil and you compact it to this amount of pressure, it needs to be at least 18 inches wide and it can go so high. So the state of New Mexico had so much of that, they wrote a state amendment and they put prescriptive criteria in for rammed earth. So yes, it can happen, which really makes it easier for the people out there building rammed earth. Now, could that be possible with other things, whether it's straw bale or other things out here? It could happen, but usually to get amendments moving, you need a little bit of a group of people that are interested in those types of products to, you know, try to work with state administrative people and propose state amendments. I know that happens in Minnesota too. So, but it's absolutely possible. Yes?
Not all states are, you know, the same. How does Wisconsin fare? You know,
Well,
how progressive are we, and where are we regarding coalitions and getting things passed?
Well, since I'm a Minnesota resident, you know, Wisconsin still has their own building code, their own homegrown code, but I think they're moving toward the national codes, the international codes. I can't speak for how they put them together and stuff. I know how Minnesota does it, but it's not like being separated by a river can be that different. I just think if there's enough demand for something that the state would almost encourage you to try to get these kind of things into the code. I know Minnesota's pretty pretty willing to listen to proposals for amendments. Sure. I don't have enough experience with Wisconsin to know that. Sorry. Yes, sir.
In Wisconsin, there's a building code review board that meets regularly, but it's all totally made up of building material manufacturers and big contractors and stuff.
Sure.
So like the home builder, the local guys aren't represented in that at all. So it's a little hard to work with those people.
I think you need to find a way to get your foot in the door. I don't know how that is, but I know in Minnesota they actually have similar boards, but they actually have a certain criteria where they said there's going to be 3 licensed general contractors, 3 building inspectors, 3 manufacturers reps, so they get a really good mix. I mean, that's the only way you can, to me, that's the only way you should really be doing it. You need everybody's input. So, yes, sir.
I'm curious, we have some land up in Bayfield County by Port Wayne, and we're thinking about building next year, but that Bayfield County has smart growth, these kind of different things, and so, I mean, a lot of this stuff must vary from county to county. True or not?
Yeah, the question from the gentleman up by Bayfield, which, by the way, is one of my favorite places in the world, is that in that area, they don't, it sounds like their provisions, maybe they haven't even adopted a building code stuff, but one of his comments was that do these kind of things vary from throughout different parts of the country? Absolutely. They vary from city to city. You can go into Minnesota and go from one city to another, and on one provision get a different opinion, and sometimes that's because of the building inspector's experience with it. And a lot of times if you come in with a new product and you just used it in a neighboring city, and now you're going to start in this city, just mention it to the building official. In fact, what I'd recommend is if you had a new product, write down the name of the jurisdiction, city or county that you used it in, what building inspector approved it, and keep a running list. And next time you go to a new city, oh yeah, we used that in so-and-so, and if you want more information, call Joe Blow in the city of Aiken or something. And that way they can communicate with each other on those kind of things, and they can also learn from each other, and it's more likely that you'll get those kind of products approved. All right, I'm going to move on. So so this is a report like in the house sheathing, and they're gonna evaluate certain parts of that vapor transmission, air barrier, and check it to a standard, give them a report. And that's going to happen with a lot of products. And this is just kind of what these evaluation reports look like. They have a ton of information. The best part is it's like free. And the greenest part is you don't even have to print it. You can read it right on the screen. No, they're very short, but if you're doing exterior plaster, stucco, you're always using a grade D paper, by the way. It's the only one that's vapor permeable. Okay, what if you're using some other kind of a system? You want to have a breathable something behind it, a little airspace behind your exterior cladding and stuff. Bring as much information to the building official as possible. Show them what you're planning on doing. Okay, let's talk about some particular kind of things, and we'll chat a few seconds about each, and we'll talk about the issues with them. So these are not, or may not be, typically in the building code. Vegetated green roofs. When you're putting on a green roof, you say you're going to go to some building inspector, some department, and say, I want to put on a green roof, I want to put sod, or I want to have trees growing, shrubbery, and all that. They're going to have some issues with that, because, especially if they haven't seen it before. So the best thing to do is to look at those kind of things that are the issues. If you're going to put a vegetated roof on, first off, I want to know what it's going to weigh. I want to know that structurally it's going to handle it. Okay, let's get past the first hurdle. What is it? Determine what that is actually going to weigh per square foot, dead load, and then figure out some live load for snow. Because I heard in this part of the country it snows, and we have some snow issues. So you may, depending on what kind of a system you're building, maybe it's an open web floor truss or whatever for your roof. Get some specs from the manufacturer. If they're engineered systems, it'll be a lot easier. If you're going to stick frame it, you're going to probably need to have a lot more data. When I say stick frame, meaning solid sawn lumber, something other than engineered trusses. So structural integrity. What else on a roof is pretty typical? It rains, it snows, we want to make sure it drains. We don't want to have that water sitting up there. So give a lot of details about the drainage. Do you have drainage membranes, mats? Do you have scuppers? How are you going to drain this? What are other kind of things? Those are really the key things. For some situations, it actually in some areas of the country, fire code is actually an issue, but you'll probably run into that more with commercial structures with green roofs. Okay, straw bale. Okay, you're going to come to somebody with straw bale. You know, most straw bale homes, the walls are straw bale, but typically they're post and beam construction. In other words, you have framing in between that will serve as your structural system. But you also have provisions in the code for wall bracing. In other words, if you put a building up, whether it's a tent or whatever, and on a high wind, it's going to have a tendency to move a little bit. So if you have a straw bale and you don't have a sheathed wall or lead-in bracing, how are you going to provide, what are you going to do to it that will provide that lateral bracing? In most cases, a straw bale with the mesh and the cement coat on it, or whatever kind of coat you're going to put on it, is going to probably provide that bracing anyways. What other issues might you have with straw bale? How about the weather-resistive exterior? Provide some details to the building official. If the straw bales are non-bearing, it's going to be a lot easier. If you intend to build some kind of a wall system, whether it's straw bale or something similar, or cob or whatever, that's going to be a bearing system, you're going to probably have to show a lot more detail if it's a bearing system. It's carrying the load of the wall above. That's a bearing system. So show them how you're going to comply with that. Structural is a big issue. Weather resistance, big issue. Water resistance. Solar panels. Put solar panels on your house. What might be some of the issues? Let's say you've got an weight of the panels. How much do these panels weigh? These panels here weigh less than 5 pounds a square foot. And in this, actually it's my house. But in this situation, my roof system was already designed for 40 pounds per square foot live load. And they, in the part of the city that I live in, the designated live load is 35 pounds. I already had a 5 pound gap, they're not a gap, but 5 pounds to play with. The building official approved this because they were less than 5 pounds, so I still underneath the 40 live load that the trusses were designed for. What other kind of loads? Uplift. The building official wanted to know how I was going to brace it from wind uplift. In this part of the country, we probably have, even in Wisconsin, it's probably 90-mile-per-hour wind load. So are you getting, what kind of tie downs? How will you be bolting it? Will you have blocking in between the trusses? Those are the kind of things they're going to want to look for. The installer of these panels actually brought some engineering data, kind of standard engineering data for wood frame roofs from the manufacturer of the products, and that was supplied to the building official, and actually that worked for structural. The other thing they're going to look at is flashing. How are you going to keep you're going to drill some holes in those shingles, how are you going to flash them? So he brought along flashing details. In fact, the flashing details on this, it was just so simple. I couldn't believe how easy and how smooth it went. So that other information. And then the only other thing was orientation on site. This roof faces like within a ½ degree of dead south. It's actually perfect. So that worked well. And then electrical, that went through with Minnesota State Electrical Inspector, and then there was, you know, it's kind of like what kind of wire, how you're going to run it, is alternating current, direct current. So the more information you provide, the easier. And the gentleman that submitted the contractor that installed these for me, I don't think we waited more than like 2 days to get the permit for the solar. That actually went pretty smooth. But he had a stack of data. And later the building official actually, instead of the building inspector coming out for the inspections, the building official, the chief, came out. He said, you know what, I've never inspected solar panels in my life. I want to see what they look like. I want to see what I should be looking for. And he climbed up on the roof with me. He says, let's go check this out. He said, I really like this idea. So he was learning by doing the inspections, and I shared as much information as possible. So you know that the next time somebody comes in with a permit application for solar, his job's going to be a little bit easier. So I like to provide building officials with as much as possible. What else? Composite plastic decking. If I was going to build a deck right now and I didn't want to use wood, what might else I use? Composite plastic, something with 50% or more plastic. Can you tell me a brand name of a composite plastic? You know, there's, I looked at some research that was done. There's over 100 manufacturers of composite plastics in this area, in this 5-state area right now, over 100 manufacturers. And in the building code, the International Residential Code, they actually now reference a standard. It's American Society of Testing Materials standard for composite plastic that checks everything from structural, expansion, contraction, flame spread, durability, resistance to ultraviolet rays of the sun. And it's a really good standard, and if a manufacturer has had theirs tested and passed the standard, you can have some assurance right off the bat that the product should last, okay? But in the building code for the longest time, they never referenced, up until about 3 years ago, they never referenced composite plastic. You know, and that happens with a lot of new technology. The more you see of it, eventually it gets into the building code itself. So usually in the composite plastics, my best advice is ask a manufacturer if they've tested it to this standard, and if they passed the test. It's one thing to, you know, it's like taking a test but not quite passing. Okay. Advanced framing. Advanced framing just means we're going to build a house, maybe a wood frame structure. We're going to use less wood in it. Maybe we're going to put studs at 2 foot on center instead of 16. Can we do that in the code? Sure. We can do it actually up to 2 stories in a roof in the code. If we do 3 stories in a roof, the bottom floor needs to be either 16 on center or 2x6 framing in line. But advanced framing means we're lining up, if we go 2 foot on center, we're lining up the studs with the rafters above. Maybe we're going to single top plates, which the building code allows. Maybe we're going to engineered products, open web trusses, wood eye joists, microlam headers and stuff. So, you know, in fact, I see a lot of builders that are still building green homes, sustainable LEED homes, are still sticking with the double top plates. Instead of the single top plates actually complicates things. Finish heights, and so they've been avoiding that. But I see a lot of things where they're actually trying to use less lumber. Does that create problems with the wall itself? Probably not. You still need to brace the wall, you know, sheathe it, or if you're going to go with foam, some kind of a lead bracing, metal bracing, something to resist the wind loading. So optimum value engineering is just using less wood, still meeting the building code. Yes, sir.
On that wind loading, are they starting to get it into the code more about the, you know, reaching the hurricane straps on down at the bottom? Is that happening or no?
We probably won't see hurricane straps. I think what you're referring to is from the top down. Let's say you build a 1-story Rambler style home. You got hurricane clips from the trusses to the plate, and then straps connecting the rafters to the wall, not just the plate, and then down at the rim area, and then down to the foundation. I don't think we're going to see that in this area of the country, only because right now it's pretty much 90-mile-per-hour wind, and you can do that with nailing. When you start reaching about 135 or getting out on the Atlantic coast down to Florida with 155, you're going to have straps all the way down. If I were to build a house from scratch today, I'd have straps all the way down. You know what? It's pretty cheap insurance. I would certainly do that.
What about on the vapor drive on those straps, since they're metal? Is there some condensation issues there, or how do you?
You know, I just haven't seen that because of the amount, and the fact is they're buried between gypsum and wood or studs and sheathing. I just haven't seen it. Where I have seen issues with condensation is people that have decided to go to metal studs to save wood and drawing the moisture through. But if you're going to metal studs, then you're going to need continuous sheathing on the outside for the thermal break. And metal studs really are kind of I'll put it this way, you need to do a lot more to prevent moisture issues and condensation issues within a wall. Plus the carbon trail on metal studs is about 25 times as much as carbon trail on wood framing. And by the way, we're planting more trees in North America right now than we're cutting down. Okay, you could use factory assembled panels. Okay, foam plastics, a couple quick things. If you're going to use foam plastic, whether it's rigid, spray applied, closed cell, open cell, all the specs are different. My best advice, get manufacturer specifications from this, because they talk about a lot of things. Permeability, R value, density, you know, the compression on it, vapor transmission, and thermal barrier. If you build a foam wall, you're going to need a 15-minute thermal barrier on the house. You're going to need 15 minutes of separation between the foam and the interior environment, no matter what kind of foam you're using. There's only one exception that I know, and that's actually for a foam sheathing called Thermex, but that's another story. Okay.
What would you use?
Half-inch sheetrock would be a 15-minute thermal barrier, and I got 1 minute. And or something like that. Also, 3/4-inch plywood is a 15-minute thermal barrier, which sounds silly, but it is. So something to separate from the interior. Okay, Volatile organic compounds, low VOC paints are going to be in a lot of green building programs. A lot of manufacturers are listing these now. If you're using bio-based material, engineered products, engineered studs, get the specs from the manufacturer. Vapor retarders, we're all kind of used to poly, but there's a lot of different vapor retarders out there now. Gentleman out here mentioned, can we use paint? Absolutely. You can use paints, you can use polys, you can use, there's other products you can use. Interior foam sheathing would also work as a vapor retarder. Air barriers, you want to seal up the interior so you don't have moisture movement into the exterior. Does the code tell you into the wall? Does the code tell you how to do that? Not really, it just says seal them up. What kind of material are you going to use? Tape, caulk? Just put a note on the plan how you're going to do that. Indigenous materials just means you're using materials that you purchased within, or that were manufactured within 500 miles. Maybe it's the dirt in the ground, maybe it's log homes, log structures. I want to mention one thing about log structures. If you're building log homes, there's a new ICC standard for log homes that might make your job a lot easier. It's called ICC 400. It talks about everything related to the logs themselves, even energy related. If you're going to waterproof your foundations, building code's not really specific about types of waterproofing, but there's a lot out there. Bring those kind of things to the building official and say, I'm going to use this gray stuff, we're going to spray it on so thick, can you approve this? It's an alternative material. Here's a rammed earth. I mentioned that earlier. Can we reuse materials? There's some limits on what you can reuse. You can actually reuse framing. You can reuse the whole house. Okay. Earthship, this is the one with the card tires I mentioned earlier. Energy, the energy code, basically more energy savings, and if you have different kinds of materials you want to do that with, whether it's some kind of foam or something, bring that to the building official. Talked about performance. This is Adobe. I don't think we see much Adobe in the cities. The Forest Stewardship Council actually is a chain of custody certification to certify that your lumber was from a site that used sustainable, manageable building or growing practices. Good growing practices for lumber. Summary. If you're going to propose something that's not in the code, as much data as possible for the building official will make your job easier, a lot easier. Test data, and try to install it according to the way it was proposed in the submittal documents. You know, if you have something that you're going to, some information that you followed up after you got the permit, give it to the building official. If you're going to make changes, contact the building official before you do it. And questions or comments? I got about 10 seconds, I guess. If you have questions down the road, send me an email. And there's some evaluations out there. If you could fill them out and leave them, they would really appreciate that. I have some information, some contact information. Feel free to take that. Thank you very much for hanging around. Hope you have a great fair.